Okay, so, thank you, Dr. Natarajan, for coming in and sharing your story. I have watched your video. I found it really interesting, and I had immediately a lot of questions. Before we discuss your video, can you maybe share what you do? How did you come about this topic? And you also mentioned that you have been following very closely the data around the COVID, and you've been following the virus origins from the beginning. So can you tell us about yourself?
Look, I am a cardiologist. I am what is called an interventional cardiologist. I make a living doing interventional cardiology. But because I am a doctor per se, right, I've done an undergraduation, I've done a post-graduation in internal medicine, and I've done what we consider as a Ph.D. in cardiology in my country, and I practice in Delhi. I have trained in Japan, in the UK, and in the US. But I am a professional cardiologist. All right, that's my basic way of surviving. And because I'm a doctor, I somehow developed a great interest in this particular virus way back at the end of 2019 and in the beginning of 2020. And somehow things seemed very peculiar to me. Everything was not balanced, and I began swallowing these papers which were being published in the leading medical journals, and these were all free. You did not have to subscribe to these journals to read these articles, whether the journal was the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, or JAMA, the British Medical Journal. All these papers were free, and initially the data came in from China and Italy, and so we became aware of the fact that there was a new virus in the horizon. Not in the horizon, it had actually entered China, and this had evolved or developed, originated from Wuhan, that's a city in China, and was very quickly spreading all over the world. And this is, I'm talking, the timeline is Jan-Feb of 2020. Now, being a doctor and having practiced clinical medicine since 1978, and having practiced largely in Delhi, which is a huge city, very heavily populated, I would have seen just about every disease possible. Well, that's a very dramatic statement to make, but it is the truth. Right from actually seeing cases of tetanus, rabies, and to, of course, heart attacks and heart failure. That goes without saying. So what I found was that here there was a great deal of fear-mongering going on, because we had faced diseases, for decades, if not for centuries. And we had we had the latest technology. And the latest technology is available in India. And with the internet, you have access straight away to the information which is being produced or provided in Europe or the Western world. So we are up to date, up to the hour, in fact. All right. So we had the information. And I didn't understand this panic about this virus at that point of time. Right. That was my first alert, my first red flag. And then I read this perspective article published in the New England Journal of Medicine sometime in February or March of 2020. This was by two people, Tony Fauci and Redfield. Redfield, even at that point of time, was the chief of the NIH. No, I think he was the CDC chief. And Tony Fauci was in charge of the NIAID, right? And over here, they were talking about this new virus, which was still called COVID-19, I think. And what they said was that there was a mortality, there was a fatality with this virus, but this was more or less as much as with the flu virus. So, although it was a novelty, although it was new, although there was a problem, I mean, this was not a scenario of complete annihilation of humanity. But having written this perspective, or a sort of editorial for the New England Journal of Medicine, then I watched him on CNN. I watched Tony Fauci on CNN, and there he was always proclaiming that this is a very dangerous virus. This is going to wipe out humanity. This is going to kill people. We got to watch out. We are in for very, very bad times. I found this discrepancy here. You're writing something and you're saying something else. And at the same time, I found that people in my country, in my city, were also getting very nervous. And soon the lockdown was put in place in March of 2020. And I publicly spoke out against this lockdown in March 2020 and saying that this is a respiratory pathogen and therefore a lockdown won't serve much purpose. There was no point. And because we already had some sort of a sense that young people were not getting severely affected by this virus, the virus was being tackled very easily by young people without any medication. So, therefore, there was little point in restricting young people because there would be collateral damage. And I highlighted the fact that there will definitely be a dent in the economy of our country as well as elsewhere. Apart from the fact that there would be problems with children locked up in their homes, there would be the possibilities of domestic abuse, child abuse, and of course reduced learning for the children. I also, and then, yes, this was in March 2020. This is still on YouTube. A very senior journalist in India interviewed me for this. And of course, I was laughed at. I was disparaged, and people said, this guy is nuts. The lockdown continued. I remember I used to go to the hospital in absolutely empty streets. There was nothing. Even the cats and dogs had disappeared. There was nothing. There was nothing. There was actually pin drop silence on the streets of Delhi, which is unheard of. Delhi is a very noisy, bustling city. Nothing. Everyone was voluntarily in their homes. So then I realized that this was probably for the first time in human history that almost the entire world had gone into a voluntary house arrest. And no one before had achieved this. Not Genghis Khan, not Timur the Lame, not Napoleon, not Stalin, not Hitler. No one had done that. This was for the first time that the entire world had gone under lockdown. And I also realized from the data that people who were getting, having a problem with the virus, that is actually dying of the virus, were the elderly people, very elderly people in their late 70s or in their 80s, and also who had diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, or they were obese, so they had some problems, heart failure to begin with. These were the people who were more vulnerable with this virus. And during this time, there was this very good paper by this very famous epidemiologist called Ioannidis. I forget the first name. He's from Stanford. And he had published this paper in which he had said that he had assessed the infection fatality rate of this virus in multiple countries. And his conclusion was that below the age of 70 years, the fatality rate below the age of 70 years was a mere 0.05%, which means 5 deaths in 10,000 infected. So with that figure, I couldn't understand why there was so much of fear mongering. Why were they telling people to stay locked up in their homes? That was bound to affect them physically. That was bound to affect them psychologically and mentally. And it did. It did. It knocked off their brains. It made them overweight. It increased their blood sugars, increased their blood pressure, because if you're not walking around, if you're not walking, if you're not exercising, you're bound to get sick. So this is what happened, right? This was at that point of time. And then somewhere down the line, I started reading stuff on a drug called Ivermectin. This was for parasites. And luckily for me, I had written an article for a kind of a journal in India in the year 2015, that is 5 years back. I had written an article on this very drug because the Nobel Prize was given to the chaps who had discovered this drug. The Nobel Prize in 2015 for physiology or medicine was shared by an American and a Japanese, and also a Chinese woman who had worked for an anti-malarial drug. So ivermectin was an anti-parasite drug, all right? And by now, by 2020, from 2015 or earlier, ivermectin had been used in actually billions of people. Billions of doses had been used, and the drug was extremely safe. There was no problem with the medicine. So I very gingerly began using ivermectin in my patients. Now remember, I am a cardiologist. I won't treat fevers and coughs. I will treat serious heart patients with heart failure or heart attacks. I'll have to go and do angioplasties and stenting in them. But these were people who had been earlier my patients or the relatives of my patients. So you understand? So they came to me indirectly.
So why were you using ivermectin? For what purpose in your work? And was it before pandemic you were using it?
No, I never used ivermectin ever before in my
Oh.
pandemic, in my career before the pandemic. I knew about the drug because I had written this article. I had researched on the medicine for this article, which I wrote for a journal in India, published in India, because the Nobel Prize was given to the people who had discovered this drug. All right.
Okay.
So now we come to 2020, the autumn of 2020, and now there would be people who would say that we have at that point of time anyone who came down with fever and cough would invariably have COVID. You do a PCR test or whatever test, it would turn out to be, would turn out to be COVID. And a lot of them did develop a pneumonia, the classical pneumonia, that's a bilateral pneumonia on both lungs, subpleural pneumonia. Okay. Now, I started giving them ivermectin, one tablet. And then I found that just about everyone was recovering with this medicine. And right there, at that point of time, Merck, the company which originally developed ivermectin, okay, ivermectin was made by a company called Merck.
Yes.
Merck issued a statement that ivermectin is dangerous in patients with COVID. Now, that was a huge red flag for me.
Okay.
I mean, that seemed absurd to me. So I knew right there and then that the drug probably does work, and this is propaganda once again. And then I was using it more or less in everyone I thought was having COVID-19, okay? And everyone recovered. There is a caveat to this because all these people came to me very early or contacted me very early. Frankly, nobody actually came to me physically. These recommendations were being made on the telephone. Because remember, we were under lockdown. But they were all recovering. They would provide me their blood reports, their CT reports, right? And the X-rays or the CAT scan of the chest. If it was done, I would give them ivermectin, and they were responding. Not a single person went into hospital. And I think I treated about 400 odd patients with ivermectin. Their ages ranged from, I think, 14 years to almost 80 years. The 14 or 15-year-old kid was my neighbor's children, the son and daughter. Right? They were teenagers, young chaps still in school. They all recovered. The gentleman who was almost 80 years, he had diabetes, he had blood pressure. He had been my patient. I had angiographed him twice in the past. Even he recovered. So just about everyone, man or woman, they were all recovering with this drug. And so therefore, I started speaking out about this drug. I was making these small videos on YouTube, and that's when I got canceled on YouTube. So all of 2021, I was off YouTube.
Your channel was removed?
Taken down, yes. I made a very elaborate video on the usage of ivermectin. That was taken down. But before that, I had made multiple videos. For instance, in May of 2020, I had made my first video specifically for the general public that please do not get scared of this virus. We have the brains, we've evolved to this point of time, so we should be able to tackle this. I cannot promise you, but there must be a way out of this problem, all these problems. I mean, the purpose was to reassure the public. And in May 2020 itself, I had pointed out that the PCR test was a very dodgy test. I had given the reasons for that. I pointed out that the paper which was presented for publication was by Christian Dostal, who was probably, or the second author was also the editor of the concerned journal. This was a European journal, and this paper was accepted in 24 hours, which is unheard of, never seen before, because at that point of time, a paper of mine took 5 months to get accepted for publication. And these guys got their paper published in just 24 hours, and they already had the PCR test. And this was in January. I think this was between January 22nd and January 23rd of 2020.
Right. So at that time, nobody even was thinking about the COVID. In January, in Germany, at least, we were not even bothered about the COVID.
You as an individual were not bothered, but the concern, the chaps, connected. Like your Fauci is Christian Dostal. There is this guy. He's a scientist. He is your Tony Fauci. As Jeremy Farrar was the Tony Fauci for England. And Tony Fauci, of course, was Tony Fauci for the US. So Christian Dostal was pushing this PCR test. which was a very dodgy test to begin with, especially with the cycle threshold levels which they had adopted, which was almost 45 or 40, in which case you were just picking up anything and everything.
Yes.
So I was pointing this out in May of 2020, and that video is still on. It's still there on YouTube. So these
Mhm.
videos are still there. I don't know when they will take them down. And in July of 2020, that's almost 4.5 years back, I made two videos pointing out that this virus cannot be coming from nature. This virus has to be man-made.
Why
I'm not
did you?
an virologist. That's not my territory. I'm not an immunologist. Again and again, I'm repeating, I'm a clinical cardiologist or an interventional cardiologist. But I can read data. I can understand data. I can crystallize the conclusions. So it was my assessment, especially because I read this paper, which was published by this group in North Carolina by Ralph Barrick. He
Mhm.
had published a paper a few years earlier, wherein he had constructed this chimera, this mixture of a virus, okay, and by which he infected humanized mice. That means mice with some sort of human lungs. Not only was he able to infect them with this chimera of his, he also reported that there was severe pathology in their lungs. So I knew that these guys already had the know-how of constructing a virus, a coronavirus, which could damage humanized lung in mice. All right.
Yeah.
And the author, there was a chap, because I was very intrigued by this paper, simply because the first author is Vineet Manachari. I don't know, this guy is obviously an Indian. So there were two authors of this paper who were Indians. One was Vineet Manachari, and the other guy was, I think his name is Prabhakaran or Sudhakaran. Sorry. So that paper was very intriguing. And at the same time, we had this paper which had appeared in January of 2020 by a preprint by the Chinese so-called Batwoman, Xi Zhengli. She had published that paper on that virus, the Rhinoceros apheris, TG13, because it was discovered in 2013 in that some mine in somewhere in China, which was around 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. So I was trying to connect the dots, because the SARS Corona 2 was about 70 or 75% similar to SARS 1, but this virus, the RATG13, was almost 96% similar to the SARS-CoV-2. And I also knew that Ralph Barrick in North Carolina, he was creating these viruses which could attack.
Synthetic viruses, and he filed, as you mentioned in your video, he filed, I think, for
Yeah,
patent.
yes, he filed a patent in 2018, and that's
I
on
found
the
one in 2006. I found one that he filed in 2006 specifically for
SARS.
coming up with synthetic viruses,
Yes.
inserting the copy of the DNA into the RNA into the cell, so that that was supposed to be injected into the host cell, and then it would cause a pathogen. But that's, as you mentioned, that had to be injected, but he couldn't.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, continue.
Yes. Yes. Now we come to this interesting phase, and this I've gathered from this wonderful gentleman, Jim Haslam, and the video I made is kind of I acknowledge that his work, because he then somehow, I think he had access to some sort of a a whistleblower in the NIH or the CDC, a gentleman called Major Murphy, and through him, Jim realized, or was made to realize, that to make it simple, in simple English, that
Mhm.
Ralph Barrick's team had cloned this synthetic virus, right, which had the possibility of infecting bats, but he wanted to make it airborne, you see, which is a huge leap. That is a big difference. What he wanted was that the virus be transmitted from one host to the other and the next through air. That is an aerosolized version. So for that, he sent his stuff to Tony Fauci's lab, which is in Rocky Mountain in Montana. Here, you see, the interesting thing is the gentleman running that lab for Tony Fauci was a gentleman called Vincent Munster. Now,
Mhm.
Vincent had worked with a brilliant man in Rotterdam, a Dutch scientist whose name is, I think Ron Fuchsia.
Mhm.
Ron Fuchsia. Now, Ron Fuchsia's work is outstanding, because he was the first person to show that the bird flu virus could be made airborne by injecting multiple ferrets. Do you understand? In their laboratory, to simplify things, they inject one animal, they inject one ferret. Okay, they infect that ferret with this virus. When the ferret is infected, they take some stuff from him and inject that thing into the second ferret. From the second ferret, they would take it to the third ferret, from the third to the fourth, from the fourth to the fifth, from the fifth to the sixth. It was a mechanical process, a physical process. But then they found that in the chain, in the ninth or the 10th animal, they did not have to inject a successive animal. It had become airborne. So this they termed a passage.
So
You
it
understand?
happened after 9th and 10th injections.
Yes,
So
after some
virus.
time, yes,
So
the virus mutated into
yeah.
an airborne form. So
Okay.
now the ferret can exhale the virus, and the next ferret can get infected, as we
Right.
get infected by the common cold or by COVID. Do you understand? But this was done for the first time. And that's when I think Barack Obama, said that enough is enough, and we have to stop this kind of scientific research. But they already had that sort of technology with them. They already had the knowledge of that technique, which they called passage. Do you understand? There were two gain of functions. One was being done by Ralph Barrick, and one was being done by this gentleman Fuchsia. Now, Fuchsia's proteges, one of his proteges was this gentleman, Vincent
Ralph
Munster.
Mm.
Vincent Munster,
Munster. Mhm.
Munster, right? Now, he was in Montana. So now
Mhm.
you connect the dots. Ralph Barrick has cloned a synthetic virus, right? Which he probably wants to use as a vaccine in bats, but he cannot go and inject every bat. That is impossible. There are millions of bats, maybe billions of bats. You can't do that. Okay. So he wants to make this particular virus, the synthetic virus, airborne. So therefore, this is sent to Tony Fauci's lab, and over there, that team is succeeds in converting this synthetic virus into an airborne virus. Now, the next step is that the airborne virus is transported to China, and over there, it was being tested in a space containing wild bats, Chinese bats. Do you understand this?
Yes.
Why did they choose particularly the Chinese bats? Because the Americans had Egyptian bats wherein the infection was not so optimal. It was not so good. So I think there is a quotation from Fauci: "We go where the action is," and they could not import the bats. There was some sort of sort of a what's the word, a resistance by the CDC, some sort of a provision that they could not be imported. It was against the law. So therefore, they tried to experiment with this juiced up virus in China. So
Yes.
it is my sense, my assessment, that the virus has already been made, and now it is to be tested in the bats, which are available only in this BSL-4 lab, because you need a very high secure lab. So the only BSL-4 lab in the world having these wild bats was the one in Wuhan. And somehow over there, this thing leaked. What were they trying to do? They were trying to make a vaccine, because this concept has been going on. This is sort of a self-spreading vaccine. For instance, I mentioned that in the video also. Let's take rabies. Now, rabies is by and large in the third world, not in the developed world, but there is rabies also. There are cases in Europe. So what they do is that in Europe they've done this and done this successfully. They dropped these meat pieces with edible rabies vaccines, and the fox gulps it down and gets vaccinated, right? So that is the edible form. Okay, and they have brought the incidence of rabies substantially down by 90% or 95%. Do you understand this? Okay,
Yes.
because so when you've got the animal vaccinated, then naturally you stop the spread of rabies, because rabies is coming from the foxes. But you cannot catch every bat and feed them this vaccine. So that is why they wanted an airborne vaccine.
Right. I
This
have
is
a
how it.
question here,
Right.
because so in case of rabies, so the reason why there was a need for vaccination is because the foxes could, because they could eat some, let's say, animals, or and then in the saliva was the virus, and then the other pets or farm animals could catch this virus from the foxes, and
No,
then get the rabies.
no, I'll make it simply. I'll make it very simple. The rabies virus is carried by the fox. Clear? I mean, that's the origin. Okay. And that virus has actually come to him from the bat. Let's get the exact science here. The rabies virus is essentially in bats. Somehow, by their droppings or by their whatever excretions, the fox gets infected. Now, the fox is capable of biting a domestic animal somewhere on the outskirts of the city or actually biting a human being. And rabies is carried on. What they were doing was they could not, again, now they could
Okay,
not, they had the rabies vaccine injection, but they cannot catch all the foxes and inject them. That's impossible. These foxes are wild animals. So what they were doing was they were
true.
dropping what is called oral injectable vaccines, oral vaccines embedded in some chicken head or some meat, so which the wild fox would eat, and he would get
Yes,
vaccinated, and therefore
yes.
that would check the spread of rabies. Okay, so
So
using the same methodology, which is called a self-serving transmission, what these people were trying was they wanted to create a vaccine which they would use in bats, and they hoped that the bat would transmit this vaccine to the other bats. Then things
so
will be very
here,
simple.
yes, so exactly here is my I have a problem, from my side, a misunderstanding is, so in this case foxes are intermediary animals.
Right.
Bats
Yes.
are intermediary animals, and it can go into humans or other animals, and then they can spread the rabies. So my question is, we know that the bats are natural carriers of viruses. They carry, I think, a large array of coronaviruses and many other viruses. They just carry them. But because they have a very unique immune system, they don't get sick themselves, but they just carry. And the problem here is that the intermediary animals and the spillover, the possibility of the spillover to humans. So my question is, why are we even vaccinating bats if they don't get sick in the first place, but they just carry them?
No, that's a nice question, but the answer is very simple. We are vaccinating bats to prevent the bats from spreading this disease to humans or to an intermediary animal.
Transmission, sort of, even if they don't get sick. So
Yes, they
for
will
me,
not get sick. Yes, they will not get sick, but they will recognize this or accept the synthetic vaccine or a synthetic virus, and mount an immune reaction to this synthetic virus, and these antibodies then they are protected, right? But they will now, this vaccine which they have absorbed, this they can transmit through their breath to the other bat. The other bat will spread it to the other bat, and the chain will go on. So this is called self replication and self transmission of the vaccine. So
okay,
now, if
so
now, if we manage to, we manage to vaccinate. I mean, this is of course, this is still theoretical, but there is a model for this, which has already been used. We've already seen that we've used edible vaccines against rabies and foxes. So what
but in
now
this
they're
case,
trying.
foxes do get sick, don't they? Foxes do get sick, and then they are infectious. But the bats, they don't get sick. So I don't understand how this vaccine
No, that
mechanism works.
no. They want the vaccine, right? They want the vaccine to get into this what's the word,
Bat.
into the bats, right? And so they want all the bats to get infected with this particular vaccine. All right. So now
Okay.
the bat will not transmit this out.
Okay. Well, okay. So in theory, they thought, there's our understanding is, the theory is that they thought somehow if they vaccinate
Rest.
these bats, they will
Yes.
not transmit.
Rest. Coronaviruses. This sort of coronavirus will not be transmitted by the bats.
But the problem is, bats are originally, naturally, they already have these viruses. That's why I'm surprised. Like, they have them historically. They already have a much larger array of viruses. They already
But
have them.
this is a synthetic virus. They never had this virus. This is a synthetic virus.
Exactly. But if they already have
They
these
had this virus
viruses,
before.
why are we
Yes.
worried about the spread? Who are they spreading them to? They already have them.
Yes. Eventually to what? Eventually they're
That's
spreading the virus
okay.
because that is the explanation they gave, because they had their forces. They had, because the Americans have they have their forces all over the world. That's a different issue altogether. But they have thousands of troops. So that's why this is a military project.
But
What they
doesn't it
want,
make more sense? Doesn't it make more sense to vaccinate with the actual vaccine, to vaccinate intermediary animals and humans rather than going into complicated method?
you cannot do that. How can you vaccinate every bat on the planet, or in China, or let's say in Laos or Cambodia or
No, not
Myanmar?
vaccinate
There are,
bats.
there are millions of bats. You cannot catch every bat, just like you cannot catch every fox and inject that fox with the vaccine.
No, what I'm saying is, since vaccinating bats seems to be a very complicated matter and seems to be very risky, and we found out why it was risky, wouldn't it be easier and better just to vaccinate the intermediary animals against SARS-CoV-2 and the people
There
rather
is
than the bats?
but there is no intermediary animal here.
Okay,
SARS-CoV-2 is a direct a direct transmission from bats to human beings.
okay, so there is another theory that is circulating that the bats transmitted to pangolins, an animal into pangolins, and from pangolins.
Yes, that theory was for SARS-1, not for this one. This one is different. And then, of course, we have that famous furin cleavage site, which is not seen in any other coronavirus. The furin cleavage site was definitely designed to split the spike. And that was man-made. That was an insertion.
So that's what I
So
wanted to talk about also. Where did the spike protein come from in these vaccines? Why is it there?
Barrick created it. He has a patent on this. The spike is a creation of Barrick. And he had cloned this from the original SARS, which probably also, again, may have been created by them. We don't know. But let us presume that the original SARS virus, SARS-1 virus, came from nature, came from bats via pangolins or some animal, and infected humans and killed hundreds of humans. That we know. From that, Ralph Barrick created or cloned a synthetic virus very similar to that one, and then created this spike. Because the most important antigen or component of this virus is the spike. And for that spike, he has the patents. He already has the patents, which are identical to the spike of SARS-CoV-2. So
Okay,
we
so
have this. So now, either this was designed to begin with to infect people, humanity, all right, or the more likely explanation is that possibly they were trying to use it as a vaccine in bats.
okay.
Either way, it has leaked out from that laboratory. And
Yeah,
the Chinese did not have the technology to create this virus. The
right.
technology or the knowledge was only with the Ralph Barrick laboratory.
I also heard somewhere that this virus itself, if we had gotten it from so-called bats, these viruses would not even be able to infect us. We would get the virus, but they will not be able to. Our body would just get rid of it. But is it? I'm not I'm not an expert. Know nothing about it. But I read that there were engineered hooks. I don't know how else to explain it. There were hooks that were in these viruses that were sticking into the human body. If we would have gotten it directly from bats, the virus would not stick. But because it came from wherever the lab, it is sticking to the human body. What do you know about this?
You're talking about the furin cleavage site. Okay, well, I'll try to give you an explanation. Now, every cell in our body has this protein called furin, which is a protease. Okay, protease means it dissolves or cuts other proteins or other enzymes. Okay, all of us have this thing called furin. Clear? All right. Now, the most important component of the SARS-CoV-2 is the spike. Clear? Right? Now, this spike has two components, spike 1 and spike 2. Okay? Just imagine, a stick with right at the middle a red line. You understand? There are two
Mhm.
parts. Okay? There is a spike 1 from here to here and spike 2 from here to here. The tip is from the tip to the middle is spike 1, and from the middle to the virus is spike 2. That is clear. Now both have different functions. Spike 1 enables the virus to attach to a human cell.
Mhm.
This one attaches itself to the human cell, but that is not enough. The spike has to break. The second bit, which is spike 2, that then pulls the virus into the human cell. So the most important thing here is the splitting of the spike protein. Have you understood this?
Yes.
I will repeat this. The spike has two components. The tip attaches to the virus. That is clear. But by
To the
doing
human
that, it will
body?
not it will not penetrate the cell.
Okay. You mean that spike, the spike one attaches to human cell?
Yes,
Mhm.
that's the one. Well, that could be the missile. That could be the missile which is launched against the human cell, and that's homes onto the cell wall.
Mhm.
But then it sticks there. I'm making it very simple for you. All right.
Yes. Yes.
Then it's sticking there. Okay.
Yes.
It now it's not moving. It cannot penetrate the cell.
Yes.
For that thing to penetrate the cell, the spike has to be cut into two.
Mhm.
It splits into two.
Yes.
The second part, then, you could call it pulls the virus into the cell or pushes the virus into the cell.
Yes.
So that bit is very important.
So was
For
that bit already in the original virus?
right. So this spot, we could now what will split this thing? That is furin. That is that protein which every cell is making in the human body. Okay, that will split on its own also, but that would not be such a efficient process. It would not be so quick. When furin comes to this spot, okay, here they have inserted a magnet or a receiving signal.
Oh,
Now do you understand
so
what
it
they've done?
calls the furin quicker so that it would break
Yes,
it up
yes,
and pull it inside the
yes,
cell.
yes, yes. That's it. It is attracting furin from the cell to strike at this point, and that is why it is called the furin cleavage site. So here there is the insertion of four amino acids, which is 12 nucleotides, but that is all very complicated. To make things very simple, they have created an artificial target, an artificial magnet to attract, to guide furin. So once furin hits this spot, then this mechanism is accelerated and the efficiency of the virus to penetrate the cell is much greater. So now it has become far more infective.
So this already means
This,
that
this was not seen in other coronaviruses. This was seen for the first time. That's why these chaps were calling it the smoking gun. And that is why in February, when they had this infamous telemeeting between all these big scientists of the world, there were Australians, there was an English chap, there were these Dutch guys, and of course Tony Fauci was supervising this. Somebody had already pointed out to Tony Fauci, look, this is not from nature, this is from a laboratory. This is structured, this is engineered.
so is
So
it
therefore,
why he said, there is a famous quote. He said, "We find the SARS-2 genome inconsistent with expectations of evolutionary theory."
yes, exactly. So what he's saying is that this appears to be made in a laboratory, and that's why they were forced to prepare a paper called the proximal origin, in which they said, which was published later, and I think in Nature or something in February. These guys had to write that paper. This chap was Christian Anderson, Farrar, all these guys ganged up and they created this fake paper, which was published, in which they suggested that this virus definitely came from nature and it has evolved into this form by that passaging phenomenon, which I've described to you, which was done by the Dutch almost a decade back with the bird flu virus. So this is the explanation they gave. I mean, to cut a long story short, they published a fake paper. All these chaps, they collected and published a fake paper which was called the proximal origin of something 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 after this meeting, right?
Okay.
This thing has been brought out by, I think this stuff has come out yesterday. Yesterday, the Americans have has some sort of a 520 pages document release, which is the conclusion or the conclusions drawn by the Congress subcommittee for the COVID pandemic, which is bizarre, which is really weird. I find it laughable, but they point this out that, I mean, the virus has definitely originated from a laboratory, and this particular paper was fake. And not only is it fake, but this fake paper was supervised or engineered or directed by our friend Tony Fauci. All this is out now. This is yesterday's news.
Okay. Well, I'll find the link and attach it to the video's
I
description.
tweeted on this. I just tweeted on this 1 hour back. So
Great.
you'll have the link.
Yeah, I will link it for everyone then to see. So to sum it up, Dr. Ralph Baric, he engineers a virus, a
synthetic
genome, a synthetic
virus.
genome, and
Yes.
then it only can be injected. It cannot be infectious unless it is injected, but they want it to be aerosolized form of this virus. So they sent it to, so now this is happening. He had this patent in 2006. So 11 or 12 years later, turns out that he sent it to Fauci. Sorry?
He also has a patent in 2018, which is a near identical to this, the one which is being engineered.
Okay, so then almost around the same time, he sends it to Fauci's lab, and then Vincent Munster, he converts it into airborne form, and then they transport it, because I checked that there are actually no bats in US that have similar SARS coronavirus. Well, at least they have different coronaviruses, but not the ones that are in China.
Yes.
And then they send it to Wuhan lab. And the reason I think you mentioned in your video is because there are some American military troops around that area, and they don't want this military personnel to get to be infected. So they want to protect these American
that is their story. That is their story. This is a
theory, yes. So that's why they wanted to inject and vaccinate all these bats in Wuhan area. And for that, you didn't mention the name of the Australian scientist in this lab, but I think it's mentioned in the book of Jim Haslam.
It is a Substack. It's a Daniel something Anderson. Daniel Anderson. So she's a victim of the system. I mean, it's not that she's not a vamp or something. You know, she's a serious scientist, and she's working there. She's doing this stuff all in good faith. There's no point naming her or pointing fingers at her. If any fingers have to be pointed to people in the US.
True.
But possibly she was there.
So the scientists in this lab, they inject with this airborne version of this virus into the bats.
Right.
However, in the process, a fellow scientist in the lab, a Chinese citizen, he gets
infected
because it's an airborne virus.
Yes.
So then he gets the virus.
Yes.
And then now we have the pandemic, right? That's the storyline in this book.
Yes.
So
also, because we know that at that point of time in October of 2019, we know that there were some personnel in that lab who got sick, and there were problems in October, November. So the virus is spreading. But we have this gentleman, probably the first person to go into the US, back to the US, and possibly spread it there. And when they isolate this virus from his lungs by a lavage, they find that this virus is an identical copy of a virus they already have, which they have already named the Washington area virus, the WA virus 1 or something.
I couldn't find it, by the way. I wasn't able to find this Washington area 1 virus anywhere. Is it? I can look again.
It is there in this gentleman's Substack. I'll send it to you. I'll send the link to you.
Okay. Well, I Googled it, and maybe I wasn't doing a good job. So we think that this gentleman, he got from the lab, he got this airborne virus infected by it.
People also got infected. He's not the only one. There must have been other people also infected, other Chinese gentlemen, living there, working there.
This is around October to 2019.
October, yes. Now we're moving into October, then into November, and in December we have the first few. The first reported case was in the end of December of 2019 by, I think, an ophthalmologist who reported a patient with an unusual bilateral pneumonia with the cause being unknown. And within 3 or 4 days, the Chinese were admitting, yes, there were cases down with pneumonia, with a respiratory disease, which was, they didn't know what was causing it. And on January 10th, the Chinese had uploaded they had isolated this virus, or they knew the genome, and they had uploaded the genome for anyone to see on January 10th. And I think on January 14th or 15th, the PCR test was ready in Germany. And on January 21st or 22nd, that famous paper was submitted by Christian Drosten, right? And he's a big man. I mean, he's one of the biggest scientists in Germany. And that paper was accepted in one day. And the WHO had accepted his PCR test. And that's it. And we were rolling into this big, huge pandemic.
Do you think, is it known? I have not read Jim Haslam's book, but if you have read it, does he mention, is there a possibility? Because my question is, these labs they must be pristine. They must have regulations, they must have policies, they might have all the rules. Is there any possibility that they were not aware that these viruses were airborne, like aerosolized versions? Otherwise, how would they get infected by it?
No, this is not new. This has happened multiple times in the past. There are many instances of leaks of viruses. There's a swine flu virus leak, and many viruses have leaked in the past. But luckily, they have been contained very quickly, and little damage has been done. People have died. There is an instance of a woman, I think she was a Russian woman, a Russian scientist doctor who died, poor thing, because of Ebola. So these things happen. These accidents do occur. But as we know, they knew that this is an aerosolized version that they were dealing with. But there was an accident. I mean, I doubt very much this was deliberately leaked. I mean, there can be only two options, right? There can be only two methods of this this virus coming out of the lab, either deliberately or as a leak. I would be inclined to believe the former, the first. This must have been an accidental leak.
Okay, so if there have been previously several cases of accidental leak,
yes, that happened.
Then my question is, you see, in everything that you do on a daily life, whether it's a corporation, it's a small business, home, we always think cost-benefit analysis. You do cost-benefit analysis. And in my opinion, the profit from vaccinating through airborne way all these bats, which already carry these vaccines, and it just makes no sense. If you compare cost-benefit, and especially if we already know that there is a possibility of this happening. But we know...
Let me interrupt right here. I think we're getting off track. You see, we must keep in mind that these people knew, and this is a fact, that the vaccine which they had created was not some sort of a bioweapon, right? This is not something which would destroy everyone that infected. This was a very mild, what is called a live attenuated virus. Okay, a live attenuated vaccine. That's the right word, LAV. Do you understand? Because we have the data, we have the mortality data now. I've just mentioned the paper which was published by Unidis in middle of 2020, that the mortality rate with this virus was a mere 0.05% in people below the age of 70 years, which is the majority of the world's population. And in 2023, he published another paper, adjusting for age. Now, I have the numbers by heart in my head because I carry them. Now, what are the numbers? The numbers are fascinating. In people below the age of 20 years, the mortality rate is 0.0003%. 0.003% in a person who's 17, 18, or 19. In a person who's in his 20s, it is 0.002%.
Okay.
In a person in his 30s, it is 0.01%. In a person in his 40s, it is 0.04%. In a person in his 50s, the mortality is 0.1%.
Okay.
But hang on. So this must be kept in perspective. And this is the mortality without any treatment. So you straight away see that it really doesn't kill people. People who die are people who are very elderly, who were given the wrong treatment. And now we come to the ventilators, we come to remdesivir. See, everything has to be kept in perspective. Now we
I
come to the
understood.
clinical.
Okay.
You see?
So
But as opposed to this, hang on, as opposed to this, I'm sorry, let me just finish this. I might forget it, right? I'll forget the numbers. We have the data from Pfizer itself. We have that infamous document. They have that first post marketing examination. This has been also published. This is in public domain now, right? Wherein they have shown that in the first 3 months, from December of 2019 to February of 2023, of those 42,000 people who had been injected, right, 1,223 people died. That is a mortality rate of 2.9%, much, much greater than the mortality with the virus. So, the problem arose not with the original bat vaccine. The problem arose when these guys came up with a vaccine against this vaccine.
and
That's
the
when we,
treatments.
yes, that's when we got hit. That
Yes.
mortality is very high. Whether it was the messenger RNA vaccine or whether it was the DNA vector vaccines, they all were killing. They all were hitting the heart, the nervous system, autoimmune diseases, multi-system inflammatory disease. So these were the killers. That,
Okay.
see, you got to keep everything. That's why.
So the risks were not so then
Well, not
we will assume that vaccinating the bats, the risks were minimal. Even if there was a spillover, even if they were going to get infected, if lab leak, it was not a big problem because we had it in the past with the swine flu and Ebola. I mean, 1 or 2 people died, but it was not going to be a massive pandemic, and that's why I guess it was okay. But now the problem is with the treatment, as you mentioned, remdesivir, ventilations, treatments, the mRNA interventions. Now,
yes.
what do you think about them? Why? What? So we all know. I think Dr. Campbell's videos. He goes one by one about all the adverse effects of these interventions. My question is why? I think we have a lot of question around why is this happening. Okay, so we understood that vaccines, they meant to help us with the bad SARS coronaviruses spillovers. Great. We now know that the risks were not that high because of the numbers you just brought. Now the problem is why do we need vaccines on vaccines? Where did that come from?
Yes. Now that is a good point. Now here, that reaction is the reaction to this whatever leak or to this vaccine. This is a bit awkward. This requires deep analysis. I can only state the facts. The facts are very grim. What unfolded has been a tragedy. Millions have got affected. They've had serious diseases, and many have died. I don't want to quote the numbers, but now we have what is called excess mortality. What is excess mortality? That is, you have, for the first 5 years before the pandemic, let's say from 2015 to 2019, you have a certain number, an average mortality rate. Now, starting from 2020, there was a slight blip, a slight increase because of COVID, but this spike went up in 2021. So with the advent, with the beginning of the use of the vaccines, in just about every country that vaccinated itself tremendously, we have this big spurt in excess mortality, which ranges from 10 to 30%. Let's take, you have this data from the US, from their insurance company. There's a gentleman called Dowd who keeps talking about this, and he gives us some very good figures. He says between 20 and 21, the excess mortality was 40% in the people between 20 and 40 years. And in people between 40 and 60 years, the excess mortality was 30%. The rise in excess mortality, all right? Now, those are humongous figures, very big figures. Even in India, I was checking out the mortality. I'm talking about crude mortality here. Earlier, for the previous 5 years, the average was about 6.5 per thousand. And last year, it had jumped to 9.5 per thousand. That is a 30% increase in mortality. This is excess mortality. So with the introduction of the vaccines, we have this big spike in deaths because of a variety of reasons, which have been confirmed by biopsy studies and autopsy studies. We have autopsy studies which have found that about 1/3 of people who have died suddenly 12% have died because of heart attack, 12% have died because of pulmonary embolism, 7% have died because of blood clots in their brain, and 7% have died because of myocarditis. About 4 to 5% have died because of this disease called multisystem inflammatory syndrome, and 3 to 4% have died because of brain hemorrhage. So now we have a lot of data. I mean, this is sort of it's so obvious now. There is no debate now that people are dying because of a variety of reasons. And all the vaccines are culprits. It's just not the messenger RNA vaccines. Even the kill vaccines are damaging people. And the vaccine used in India, that's the DNA vector vaccine, is also very dicey.
In your video, you mentioned that I think you said that the president at the time was responsible for such a horrid reaction to this pandemic. What did you mean?
Look, that is politics. I'm not a political expert.
No, but why was it in your opinion? It's not about politics, but like, why do you think it happened the way it happened, and why was it wrong?
You have a politician, there is a crisis, and the politician believes or deludes himself he's handling the crisis, and he's handling the crisis very swiftly. And this particular politician is known to speak a lot. So I mean, that became a slogan to get brownie points, little realizing that there would be a lot of hassles. The vaccines are coming out too fast. They've been developed too fast. There have not been adequate trials, no long-term follow-up. And I think I've tweeted on this even yesterday. Just listen to me very carefully. You have this 520-page document, okay, which has come out. This consists of the conclusions drawn by this Congress subcommittee in the United States of America. The what's the word? The summary is, of course, they now agree that the virus originated from a laboratory. They still insist that the gain of function was done in China, not in their country. They agree that terrible fake paper which was published on the proximal origin of the virus was more or less engineered by or directed by Tony Fauci. But their first line is that because of the warp speed, now listen very carefully, because of the warp speed, millions of lives have been saved in the United States of America. I mean, this is absurd. Do you believe this? Even now they're writing this.
So this is sort of like justification. So we did it very quickly, and that is why we saved. So they're justifying why they did it so fast.
I think it's an absurd. This is toadyism. This is sycophancy. This is because he will be the next president in just about 40 days or 50 days.
Oh, okay. So they have to
they have to hail. Yeah, they have to hail the emperor. The new emperor has to be hailed. So this is how we do it. But at the same time, they're saying that this virus has originated from China. There's a gain of function thing that people have been damaged and the compensation system is not working, and that why were the vaccine mandates made? So this is this is all politics. We don't go by these politicians, whether they're American or German or English or Indian. I don't. I'm not impressed by politicians. And you know that in your own country there's this massive leak from your Robert Koch Institute. You have this 10 GB of data which is there, which consists of emails and transcripts of their meetings, in which they clearly say that they were ordered to do this stuff. If they did not do it, their finances would be cut. They got no written orders from the German establishment. This is about Germany. And then this Dutch health minister has gone on record saying that they were given instructions to handle the pandemic by NATO. So things are very bizarre. But the point I'm making is, and everyone is making it, any person with any sense will tell you that the vaccines, the so-called vaccines which were made at terrifyingly quick and a quick speed. This is not how vaccines are made. I understand that there was a pandemic or whatever, but the reaction was very peculiar.
Do you have any speculations why?
No, that will be a leap too far. That will be going to some other extreme, and then they'll say I'm a conspiracy theorist. So I won't go into that. This is what is unfortunate. See, now we're not conjecturing. This has already happened. Right. Whatever I have spoken to you is already happened. It is established. It is documented.
So what you were saying about ivermectin in the beginning, what you were saying that it doesn't cause any deaths, that it's very low mortality from the virus, all these were conspiracy theories a couple of years ago. Now
Yes.
they're not. So I think now the word, because before the pandemic, I think everybody was afraid of the word conspiracy theory. Even people would always preface what they were about to say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but now people are more and more getting used to the fact that being a conspiracy theorist actually is a good thing. It actually means that you're stand out. It actually means you're seeking for truth. So I think it is very important that not to be worried about this label that people put on us saying it's a conspiracy theory. I think it's taking a completely different route now. So now we are on a better way of understanding why we should not be worried about it, because now a lot of people who have been like you have been completely shut down, your videos were removed, you were censored. And that's the reason why we have, even in 2024, we have people who still believe that the vaccines were safe and effective. We still believe that the lockdowns were justified. We still believe that the people who are not vaccinated are bad people or have no Christian values or don't care about other human values. We still have these people, and it is because the videos like yours were removed and people are not informed about it. And I don't think it's their fault that they were not informed, but because all this information, the truth was hidden from the public. It removed very effectively, very quickly. It was removed. Even the videos that I put up were removed without any notification or warning. So how can people stay informed? Do you have any advice for the future? Hopefully nothing like that is going to happen in the future. How to stay informed? What can you do?
That is a very, very important question. What is the take-home message of our conversation? I mean, the take-home message is one should never stop doing critical thinking. One should not go by what the media says, especially the legacy media says, by the celebrities, by Hollywood, or in India it is Bollywood, or what the politicians say. One should never go by that. One should never go by what the billionaires say. You have to do your own thinking, and you always assess the situation. Always look at a contrarian view. Also, always appreciate if somebody is saying something against the norm. Then you must sit back and ponder over what is being said. That is the most important message I can give, because these things will carry on. These things will carry on. The world has become a very volatile place right now. We are seeing it. What is happening in Gaza, what is happening in Ukraine, what is now happening in Syria. Things are getting out of control. Things are completely out of control. And what is being told to you by the media might invariably be very grossly incorrect. The true picture is completely different. People must understand this, and also keep in mind that they already have a virus. They already have a virus. As I've mentioned before, that they have published a paper using the passage technique, wherein they've already made the bird flu virus airborne. They must be having it in a flask. They can always release it. And then, once you start getting this information or getting these news features that, so many people have died because of bird flu, we have a new virus, or we have a new vaccine for it. And this thing will not stop. This thing will carry on. One must, I think, one must think carefully. Always, one has to think carefully. One has to look at both sides. However uncomfortable it is, one has to look at both angles or both perspectives in any given situation. Now they've brought out these self-amplifying messenger RNA vaccines, which means that now the message keeps perpetuating. They'll keep building these spikes. And there's a data which has been published by the Japanese last year in December. It's exactly 1 year back in the Lancet, wherein they have an incidence of almost two in I think 800 cases of myocarditis, which is very high. That is very high. That's almost 2,000 per million cases of myocarditis. And so
But these
one has to.
mRNAs, the COVID mRNAs are self-amplifying already, aren't they?
No, they are not actually. I mean, they are, in a sense, they are. But what they promised us is that it would stay localized in your arm. It would not travel anywhere. So now we know that the nanoparticles in which they were inserted has traveled all over the body, right from the brain to the liver to the ovary to the testes to the spleen to the kidneys to the heart, of course, to the intestines. We know that. And now some people have already documented that the spike proteins are visible for almost 6 months. They're still there. So all this is there. I mean, that means what they had promised, that the enzymes would break down the messenger RNAs, that is not true. But now we have a guaranteed vaccine, in which they guarantee that the
So
production is
these
permanent.
ones didn't guarantee, but these next ones are going to be guaranteeing.
Yes, that
But I'm sorry, but this is just funny. I mean,
yes, and people accept it. People accept it. Like you'll have a what are those talk show guys? Some guest will come, a famous talk show guest will come and say, okay, carry on. They'll be having, people will be dancing on television. People will be singing songs on television. They will be celebrating these vaccines. So we have to be very alert. We have to be very alert about that. The propaganda never stops.
okay. All right. So, on that very promising and optimistic future, I want to thank you for your time, for the information, and yeah, hopefully we can maybe do another episode, because I would like to go more into the vaccines themselves. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you very much.